Welcome to The Swing of Things with Amanda Kraus, a brand new podcast hosted by me, Amanda Kraus, and produced with Row 360. We're going to talk a little bit about rowing and a lot about other things. In this episode, I'm joined by 4 fabulous guests who share a love for rowing and have experienced the sport as people of color. Rowing in the United States has long been accessible mostly to white, mostly to affluent individuals. Since the summer of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement gained momentum and social unrest tore through our country, there's been a collective awakening within the rowing community. Many people, whether they be rowers, coaches, or administrators, have come forward to express concern, even shock. But this isn't a new reality. I spent 18 years as the executive director of Row New York, an organization that brings rowing to young people from under-resourced communities in New York City. I've not had the lived experience of our Row New York rowers, but I have worked to make the sport accessible, and I'm intimately aware of the challenges involved, from the logistical hurdles to the culture of the sport itself. Now, as the CEO of U.S. Rowing, I'm eager to find our champions, those who can be allies in this effort, and work to help our sport become diverse, inclusive, and welcoming. With this in mind, I'm very grateful to our guests who have agreed to join me for this conversation. Big thanks to Kevin Harris, Patricia Etem, Arshay Cooper, and Daphne Martschenko. Daphne, I wanted to, not because you're the youngest, I mean, you are our only doctor on the panel, but I did want to start with you and just hear a little bit about your background in rowing. I know that you walked onto a high school program, that you ended up rowing for Stanford, that you have your PhD now, and that you've actually represented the United States on the U23 team. So you've had a lot of success in the sport and in academically as well. And I loved hearing your story when we got to connect earlier this week about never having been an athlete before as a middle schooler and then discovering rowing for sort of your first sport. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why you think rowing resonated with you.
So as you said, I was absolutely not an athlete growing up. My parents threw the kitchen sink at me to try and get me to be active and spend time outdoors. And I hated every single sport that I tried. But I was pretty into theater, and my theater group was on our way to Washington, D.C. for a competition, and we crossed the Potomac River, and I just happened to look out and see these strange looking boats on the water. And I'm not sure, honestly, what it was about that resonated with me. Maybe that it just looked so foreign. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life. And I asked if anyone knew what was going on out there. And one of my troop mates explained that this was something called rowing and that her sister, who was in high school, did it. And I decided that when I got to high school, I wanted to try this, and maybe it would get my parents off my back because it was a sport, but it looked different from all the other sports that I'd seen before. So it was just a random coincidence that I happened to see rowing out on the water, and then I was very fortunate that my public high school in Virginia had a rowing club that I was able to join when I got to high school, and I never looked back after that.
The sport is lucky that you saw. You were driving over the Potomac that afternoon. Skipping, sort of fast forwarding to 2015, I think everyone in this space at least knows that you were the first African-American person, not just woman, correct, to row in the boat race in 2015. And I loved reading about how you didn't even know that was the case. Did you only realize that after the fact or going into it?
So a couple weeks before the race, after they had announced the blue boat, that's the top boat that races Oxford in the boat race, I got an email from someone who was in the history department at the University of Cambridge. And they said very kindly, I don't mean to add any more stress onto you. I know that this is already a big race, but I just want you to know that you are going to be the first African-American to row in the boat race on either the men or the women's side. And there are going to be a lot of young girls who are going to see you out on that race day and be very, very inspired. And so thank you. And, it was a really humbling moment for me, but also a moment in which I was just angry because it was 2015. And here I was, the first person on either the men or women's side in a race that on the men's side is over 100 years old and on the women's side over 50 years old. And I was the first person. It just was shocking for me. And I felt very strongly that, you know, the fact that someone who was unaffiliated with rowing, who is a historian, was the person to recognize this, and it seemed like no one in the rowing world recognized it. To me, it was just a signal of how white the sport is and how oblivious people were to the fact that there was just no color in the sport.
Right. Nobody had even said, wait, we're missing something here. We're missing a lot here. You told a story, too, about your high school experience, and it made me think a lot about the Row New York girls I coached over the years and bringing them to races. And they all had one another, the Row New York girls, a lot of Latina girls and Black girls and white girls and Asian girls. And so everyone, I think, was somewhat comfortable being different because everyone was different in that group. But you talked about being a high school girl rowing with an all-white high school program, and you told a story about hair being braided, which really resonated with me, that experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, you know, I'm an African-American woman. My hair was really different to a lot of the girls on the team, and as a girls rowing program, it was pretty common, at least when I was in high school, for all the girls to braid their hair, get ribbons and decorate their ribbons before each race. And people didn't know what to do with my hair. You know, I get comments like my hair is greasy when they're trying to braid it, or it's really tangled. And I think the moment that stuck out to me most was we had just finished braiding the girls' hair, and one of my teammates said, "Oh, it looks like I've got cornrows. No offense, Daphne." And for me, that was just a reminder that as much as I loved being on that team and I loved the sport of rowing, there would be these moments that would bring me back down to reality and recognize, oh, people see me as different to them.
How did you see yourself?
Well, when I first started rowing, honestly, I was so scared of it. I was afraid that I was going to flip. And so much of my energy was about learning how to get comfortable in the sport as a rower, let alone learning how to get comfortable in the sport as the only woman of color on my team. So, you know, I think, especially as a young person in high school, in an environment that's all white, it is easy sometimes to on the one hand, forget that everyone sees you as different because you just get so caught up in, you know, what everyone else is doing and the jokes. But then there will be these moments that remind you that, oh, I am different from everyone else. And not only am I different, but people see me as different. And, you know, how, if they're seeing me as different, then what does that mean about how they feel about me as a person?
Wow. That's really meaningful. Thank you. I think I want to shift over to Arshay to make sure he's not drinking his coffee. You're not drinking any coffee, Arshay.
No.
So Arshay Cooper, I is someone who needs very little introduction. Arshay's from Chicago. He lives in Brooklyn, New York. I was thinking, how do I describe Arshay? I would say author, friend, coach, chef, entrepreneur, public speaker, motivator, currently running a national effort to lead diversity with George Pocock Rowing Foundation and A Most Beautiful Thing. And Arshay, I've had the advantage of knowing you for a while now, and I don't know anyone who knows you and doesn't adore you. And I count myself among those folks. I also don't know anyone who cares more deeply about people, especially young people. And I think, you know, like I said, anyone who spent 5 seconds in this space knows who you are. But could you tell us, just bring us back, what was your experience when you first saw a boat? And we have a little theme going here because of Daphne first seeing that boat. What was I love this story.
Yeah, I think for me, it's at first it was beautiful, right? I've never seen a boat before, like live. And I kind of just stopped and stared.
Was it on the water?
No, it was in the lunchroom on the west side of Chicago at Manley High School. walk into the lunchroom after seeing a couple fights, and this lady walks up to me and she says, little white lady, and says, "Hey, do you want to be on the crew team?" And I'm like, "Crew? Like, you only hear crew when someone's asking you to join a crew, right? And you're gonna get jumped to join that crew." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Let me show you." And behind the boat was this TV monitor, and they were showing the Olympic Games. And for me, I was like, "Wow, this looked like a great opportunity," but the fact that the images and the people didn't reflect the world I was used to, I said no and walked away. And and I sat next to my friend and I was like, "Oh, what are they trying to do? We don't even swim." So no one signed up. And the next day I show up, the boat's still there, but this time there's a long line and everyone's signing up. And I was like, "What's happening?" And it said, "Hey, sign up and you get free Chicago pizza." So everyone's signing up for the pizza. And, and I was like, I was signed up for a pizza and I was signed up for this girl, Grace. And, and that was the plan, and that's it. But when I walked upstairs into the gym room, number one, seeing a woman coach, there was no women coaching boys in the 90s, like at least in my neighborhood. And in our neighborhood, most of us, due to mass incarceration and structural limitations, a lot of us was raised by women. So I was comfortable with women, right? And so to see a woman coach there, and most of my teachers were women, right? And so that made me feel pretty comfortable. And then seeing a black man, Coach Victor. He wasn't a rower, but he was a strength and conditioning coach, and he knew the West Side of Chicago. He knows a lot about training athletes, right? And so seeing him there made me and also my mom feel that I would be protected if I am possibly a part of this all-white space, right, in sport. And so I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then we had Ken, who was a white dude that was pretty crazy but had a lot of passion. And they really just told the story of all the lessons in the sport. It wasn't much about gold medals or being fast or being an athlete. They kind of spoke to the now, So when people usually speak about joining basketball or football, they talked a lot about in the future you'll be rich, you can take care of your parents, you can have this kind of car, you can the glory of it, right? But they spoke to overcoming the fear of water now, traveling now, leaving your neighborhood, right? Building a bond, all the things that were missing. And so, I said, why not, and that's how I got involved.
I love it. I love that we all have the different things that drew us in, and there's no shame in it. If it's pizza, if it's a girl, if it's a pretty boat, it's okay. So, Arshay, I would count you as one of the funnier people I know. And, no one is more fun to laugh with than you, often at my expense, which I appreciate. But I also know that underneath that, you're well aware of a lot of pain that is out there in our society, in our programs, within our youth. And what do you see? What's the pain you still see in rowing? And just to not go too negative, too dark here, what's the hope you see as well?
We talk a lot about the structural barriers, right? The swimming, the transportation, the costs. I think what was painful for me was that we shared a boathouse every day with 3 private schools, and every day seemed like an away game in our own home. And not that people were shouting and calling us names. It was hostile because no one spoke to us but those who were paid to, right? That, having the oldest boat in the city, having the most novice coach in the city, like that, having an opportunity, but we didn't have an equitable experience in the sport, And so that's the pain I still see, right? Like, because you feel that. You don't speak about it when you're young. You're happy to be there and you're with your friends and you're enjoying it. But you do see the disparities, right? And I think in sport now there are programs everywhere, right? And there are a lot of young Black kids who are enjoying themselves, but they are aware that their tent is not better than others, right? And they are aware that there's a lot of programs out there who've been around for a long time who's never seen a brand new boat, right? They have a coach who cares about them, but they understand that the organization can't quite afford someone who can make the boat move just a little bit faster, or can afford to send that coach to a U.S. rowing conference or a joint sculling conference, right? And to learn a little bit more. And so I think that it's the equitable experience that I care so much about, and that I want to help dismantle those barriers, right? And I give myself away to that mission, because I know what it's like to really have the sport change your life. But also people look at you and think that you're not winning because you're not talented enough, but that's not just the case.
Yes, very true. I know that you're also very buoyed by so many young people, and I know that they keep you energized because they have such great energy, and there's so much hope we can put into them. And I know you carry the weight of so much of this work, so disproportionately you carry so much of this weight. And I guess I'm asking this question on behalf of everyone else, especially the white people in this space. What do you think others can do to take away some of this weight? If you could just say, tell everyone else how to do this. And you and I have talked a lot about this, that, there is no simple sort of, here's your handbook on how to create a diverse, inclusive program. But, maybe if you can talk about what mistakes or missteps do you see being taken, or what missed opportunities are there? What can others be doing more of to make the sport more diverse and inclusive for young people?
Yeah, I think a lot of those programs are doing a good job with raising money, I see, and really want to diversify their boathouse. But I think it's really going out their way, like our coach did, to be creative, to find that culture color, right? That representation is so important to young people and to their parents, right? Like Victor really caught my attention, right? And honestly, I love the sport, and I could have gone to college to do it, but I didn't know if there was anyone out there beyond that. I didn't know about Kevin Harris, but he was out there. I didn't know about Patricia. I didn't know Akil was trying out for the Olympics, which he was around that time, right? So I think that representation and visibility is so important. I think the second thing, once you get the kids to the boathouse, I think really work on that boathouse culture, right? The importance of, and I think it's a mistake that some usually make, is that we didn't know that we was going to walk into a boathouse with all these private school kids, right? And they didn't know that we was going to walk into this boathouse as a large group, right? And no one really addressed the issues, the awkwardness in the locker room for a whole year.
No one said anything.
The coaches talked among each other, but not the young people for a whole year. Yeah, you know what I mean? And I think that that is something that we can work on. Boathouse culture is so important. I think the last thing I would say to that, visibility, boathouse culture, the community engagement piece is so important. Not outreach, not just going out there and recruiting kids. And if they show up, they do. If they don't, they don't. But true partnerships, right? With schools, with elected officials, with parents, right? With families, with colleges. Build those partnerships. It's not really going into a school and just recruiting an assembly, but it's really saying to the athletic director, hey, can we do a PE takeover once a month? Whenever someone on the volleyball team, the basketball team, the baseball team don't make the squad, can we come in and talk to that group, those who didn't make it immediately, and tell them about our sport? Every parent coordinator meeting, can we go in there and tell the parents the success we've seen from the students that's already from this school, and hope to recruit more young people, right? Let the parents know what's happening, right? And also, building relationships with the YMCA, and maybe some of the families should go on the college trips. Man, if our mothers we've been on a ton of college trips, but if they would have went with us, we kind of embraced the whole family, they would have done whatever it took to make sure that kid experienced all that we saw in the college trip that made us go, wow. And sometimes we go in neighborhoods and we only engage the young people and leave everyone else out. And I think it's important that we move together and help move our organizations with the ideas of the young people we want to serve in their community.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of saying it, and not leaving anyone behind there. What do you think? And this is for all of you, Arshay. I think you have the most direct experience in this space. But for the groups who say we have the scholarships, we have the spots in the boats, we made it free, they can come. We opened the doors, but no one's coming. We're not getting these kids. But it's not because we don't want them, and it's not because we haven't made it free. What do you say to that? And Arshay, I'll ask you first, but if others have a response to that, I would love to hear it.
I was like, that was more of a Kevin question, because I think that happened at Wilson for him, But I would say that, I think it's all those things I just said, honestly. Like, you have covered the structural barriers. And now you have to do what you have to do to make sure that the boathouse is warm and welcoming. That when kids walk in to that boathouse, the decor, the images, the languages reflect the young people you're trying to put in your seat, right? That makes you feel a part, right? Like, I think everyone has done a good job recruiting, I've seen, but not a great job with the retaining the kids, right? And I think number one is that they go to the boathouse and they don't see themselves there. They don't see a future at this boathouse, right? And it was the same for me when I went into Lincoln Park, but what kept us going is that we had each other. I wasn't the only, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's important. Like, again, it's that boathouse culture. It's giving them vision. It's including their parents. It's including the teachers that they trust. It's including the mentors that they trust, right? They don't trust you yet, but how do we get those who they trust involved? And I think that's how you keep them.
Yeah. Kevin, did you want to add to that?
Well, no, I think Arshay said that really well. I actually am a little bit in awe right now, because I'm kind of sitting here looking at, four people that I hold in really high esteem. Not to take it in too different of a direction, but Patricia, I want you to know that I watched you in 1984 rowing in that four. And I remember it because I had chicken pox and I couldn't go to summer rowing that year. I was probably 13, 14 years old. And I remember seeing you in that boat. I remember sitting on my floor and watching the TV covered in blankets and, whatever the pink lotion you put on when you have chicken
The
pox.
calamine lotion.
Yeah.
Daphne's
calamine
probably
lotion.
too young to know what that is. Yeah, she doesn't know.
Yeah,
she doesn't even know.
right.
We'll tell you when you're older, Daphne. Go on, Kevin.
But, that was really important to me in 1984, seeing you in that boat and, how hard that race was that you guys raced that day. I wanted you to know that because I've never had a chance to tell you that as many times as I've seen you. Arshay has been amazing. I mean, just absolutely amazing in his space. You forgot that he's a movie star. You forgot to put that part out there.
Oh my goodness. I'm so embarrassed. Of course, movie star.
Stop.
And then, Daphne, you are also one of my heroes. I don't know if you remember this, but I tried to recruit you to Tulsa at one point. But in 2015, we took our crew to the women's Henley. And we actually went to the Oxford Boathouse. And I got to talk to Chris Wilson about you a little bit. So that was really exciting because I believe that was the first year that the women were able to row the entire Tideway course over in London. And of course, and Amanda, it's just been amazing watching you in this space because the reality is, to have an ally is really, really important. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I can say, we've done a lot of work. But it's nice to see the leader of our national governing body stepping out and taking this on. So I just wanted to put that out
Thank
there.
Thank you.
Nice to hear from you, Kevin. Really, that's great to see. It's so funny when you're in the space and when you're at the Olympics and in the zone and in your race, you're really not thinking of the broadcast and you're really not thinking of sort of that point of view at that juncture.
The little boys sitting at home with their chicken pox watching you.
Well, I love the perspective. I really do, because Kevin, you're so right. There is that element of the fan in any sport and the sort of the participant and the participant observer and kind of what your actions are doing. But just at that juncture, you're so deep into the point of performance, but appreciate the shout out for everybody around, because when I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really will take such intense focus on so many different levels. So to be inclusive and to have so many diverse individuals focusing where they feel they can make the best difference and where they truly can, I think, be as laser focused as kind of looking at the person that you're sitting in front of, if you're a sweep rower or a multi-boat athlete, just to bring to the diversity space that intention and technique and skill that you're going to bring to the rowing space. I think it's not, the two types of technique are not so different in terms of how you apply something to create change, whether that change is, a faster speed down the course or diversity overall for U.S. rowing, or for just a community, or for, in addition to how can we bring this to U.S. rowing? It is how can we bring opportunity, like to definitely the Boys and Girls Clubs, to the Ys, to the YWCAs, to the YMCAs. There are just a lot of organizations out there looking for programs that can help with campus retention. There's sort of the flip side. How do we keep people who are very talented in college? And I truly would attribute rowing as to one of the reasons why I did finish very strongly at Cal, is because I was able to identify a community. There was another way to channel the competitive drive. And when you get into these colleges and universities that are so intense academically, and you're an intense person, it's nice to understand how to rechannel some of that competitive nature into a bond with other people. You could be so fiercely competitive, and that was so integral and such an important part of the sport, it wasn't a negative. So you really learn to buoy people along, because everybody had to have great technique. So it was just another way to understand then how to buoy people along academically as well. And just, that it's a different type of cutthroat.
I also enjoyed the story of how you you realized that you wanted to gain fitness, and you're such a competitor that you actually stepped back from the sport and then came back. Was it 6 months, a year? I don't know how long you stepped back for.
So credit to Cal and credit to Title IX. My first year of rowing was in 1976, really, 1976, my novice year. And I was quite a novice, was just taken by the sport, the boat being on campus, and, it was such a draw, and there were a lot of other women, just the possibility and the aspiration. And for somebody who loved sport from very young, seeing Wilma Rudolph saying, I want to do that, I want to be in the Olympics, I don't know how, but I want to do something like that. So I think that was just kind of my calling. Rowing was just my,
And what
calling.
was that? I mean, what's interesting, I think, hearing from you is, it was really such a beginning for women's rowing too. So being a person of color, but also being a woman in the sport. And what was just the atmosphere? Where did you, I mean, I know you rowed at Cal, but what was the boathouse like? What was the atmosphere like being a woman and a woman of color at that time on that campus?
That is the best question, because I will tell you, the first women's boat at Cal was taken from a boat that had been hanging in a restaurant called the Miss Italy. We had no money, right? It was literally the start of Title IX is when we started. We sanded that boat. I mean, it was amazing. Just this possibility that was so beautiful that everybody was committed to, and you had no idea the end point. We didn't know that deprivation. So we were there sanding the boat. The men, were often there. Historic.
Where'd the men get their boat? Was it from another restaurant or?
Anyway, it was called the Miss Italy because it was rowed by some Italian Olympians way back in the day. But that was our first boat, women's boat at Cal. I was quite heavy at the time, but we were novices, and the coach was taking tall women who were interested to expand the team and comply with Title IX. So it was such a sisterhood. I loved it. So being the only African-American, as I mentioned, I grew up in a family where we were the only African-American family in the town. My parents both were at Western Washington University. So that part wasn't so new, to me. But in terms of opportunity and women, it was new. We would have conversations like, I don't know, if we were offered financial assistance to do this, would that be the ethical thing, or we're just here to contribute to the campus? Like, that's how new, sport was for women. So we were having those kinds of conversations.
Wow.
But then I say wow now to us. Yeah.
The boat from the ceiling is one of my all-time favorite rowing stories I've ever heard. I didn't know that. That's incredible.
And went on to, Pac. At that time it was Pac-8 championships, then it was Pac-10. But I had courage to step back and get fit, because my first race ever was one of the most shocking things in my life. Where at the last 500, literally I could barely make it up the slide. I mean, literally I thought I was going to die. It was at UCLA, right there at the cut. My sister came to watch. She drove her car right up to the starting line, Pat. To talk about, when Arshay talks about the culture, like, that's even part of the culture, right? Your sister coming up and I'm waving her off and she's waving at me. But at any rate, I realized that I loved the sport and I loved it so much and I wanted to do so well. And I knew I could be good. I didn't know I could be an Olympian. I knew I wanted to be one. But I just had to have the fitness baseline that a lot of the women had that I didn't have. And I knew that. And so I just took time off and ran hills and came back stronger an entire year later.
It worked. It obviously worked. You went on to have an extraordinary collegiate career and then represent the United States on the national team. And so one of 5 Black Olympians for the United States, which I know we talked about a few weeks ago when we US Rowing put that panel together. It was discouraging how easy it was to fit the 5 of you in a Zoom screen. And then, does that mean you were the first with Anita then? Or was it you or Anita?
So Anita was first. Anita rowed in 76.
Okay.
She was on the 76.
Okay, so she was right ahead of you. Okay.
And then my first development team was 1978.
Okay.
So yeah, you had mentioned sort of another way to bring diverse people into the sport, and I think having some really strong development programs that help people see the stepping stone, right? That you feel as an athlete, you want to get to the next level, but you need to see kind of just that next level and then the next level, because many people know about the Olympics, but it's just the ways to gain entree need to be apparent, and they need to be accessible, and they need to be intentional. That's what I see missing. Kind of the biggest thing that I see is it's become more and more and more something of exclusion. Do you have an ERG score? Nobody ever asked us about that. You could be good and you could have a bad ERG score for your first 2 years, but now it's this, with all this data, it gets to be, how are we going to, well, sorry, there's this, there's that, your arms are too short. There wasn't that. It was like, you look like you could row. We need more of that.
So go back to the late 70s, early 80s, and then think about what maybe as a young woman racing at that point, and if someone had asked you, how do you think the sport will look in 2022? Do you think it would look different than it does now?
I was hopeful. I think that colleges and universities had some challenges along the way. Our entire society. There was Prop 209. The UC, I don't know about the West Coast, the East Coast, the UCs, when I was at Cal, 7% African American population. Now it's 2%. It's just, there have been policies at the university level. Again, we have gotten into this exclusionary society. So if you want to do more recruiting, what's happening at the Cal State? What's happening at the state? What's happening at the community college? Because we need to do a whole lot of advocacy of turning around some policies that, for example, unfortunately, this ballot season failed in California, to really get back on track about how we're going to actually have diversity, equity, and inclusion on our campuses.
Yeah, you're getting at this is a deeper problem than rowing, isn't it?
And that is our reality for it. Is that if we're going to truly do intentional recruiting now, we have to start at the high school level.
Yes.
Because our numbers are so few at the college level.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, we have to be, as Arshay mentioned, and I'm sure as Daphne experienced and Kevin, we have to be so invested, and our campuses have to be so invested monetarily, with their athletes themselves. My daughter never should have been able to make it through Cal as a fully funded athlete, not having to go down to Berkeley High and talk to young people. It should be required for anybody who's on a scholarship, for the whole team. People need to be out there where the athletes are required to go to study hall. They need to be required to get involved in their community. It will help them with their profession after they walk off that campus. It will help other people. It will just give them a lens and an opportunity to share and literally be around diverse people, which they want to be on, I just think it solves so many things, but the coaches cannot be so insular.
Speaking of coaches, thank you for that. Let's shift over to Kevin for a minute, who's also a member of the U.S. Rowing Board, which I'm personally so excited about, and just joined the board last month. And Kevin, you started rowing in high school, and now you're the women's head coach at Tulsa in Oklahoma, where it seems like essentially built that program from scratch. I don't know if you got a boat down from a restaurant ceiling. So,
No,
you can't beat that, but it sounds like you also had modest beginnings there. So, and I guess my first question for you is there anything you want to make sure you respond to in the listening you've been doing so far?
Well, quite frankly, like I said, I'm a little bit starstruck. Like I'm listening to my colleagues here just really lay it down, and Patricia, you're so right about that college piece, because we live it here every day, and I think about, so I learned to row actually in high school in Washington D.C. as well. I went to T.C. Williams High School, which is now, because T.C. Williams is named after a former superintendent of Alexandria City Public Schools who was a segregationist, I might add. That school is now going to be called Alexandria City High School sometime here in the near future. And I make that point for a couple of different reasons, because, going back to the original question that you asked Arshay, what does it take to keep kids, make the boathouse more diverse, to really retain people in the boathouse? And, the answer for me was, it was my friends, right? It was the parents of my friends. The group that invited me down to the boathouse were white. My best friend was Justin Smith and his mother, Patricia Smith, who just happened to be really involved in the school system and the support for T.C. Williams High School, and still is to this day, which is a long time that she's been working for kids. She took me to the tryout, and I couldn't swim. And somehow I made it through the swim test. And I remember her on the side of the country club pool helping me, just telling me that I could do it. And somehow I got through it and passed the test. And, the coaches who were there, D. Campbell, who was an old Southern gentleman in every way that you can imagine, but he was never going to let anyone tell me that I couldn't be at the boathouse. Whatever his other feelings may have been, we had great coaches, and that was the reason why I stayed, because, when I was a young rower and I almost quit 2 weeks into it, my coach put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You know what, Kevin, you're going to grow up to be something ridiculous, like 6'1", 180 pounds. You're going to be a great rower." And I might be 5'9", and I'm certainly not 180 pounds, but I'm probably too far the other way. But as a 13-year-old looking at, Coach Penn, Michael Penn was his name, and looking at him and saying, "Really? You really think that, Coach?" And he, with all of his vigor, convinced me that I needed to be in that boathouse as a 110-pound 13-year-old, carrying wooden boats and wooden oars down to the water. A few years later, he invited me back to be his assistant coach, and I reminded him about that. And I said, "Coach, you remember saying that to me?" And he laughed. He almost fell on the ground with laughter. And I said, "You lied. You lied to me." And Mike said, "Yeah, but you're still here." And that was one of the most important things that anyone has ever done for me, right? Was to put their hand on me and say, "Hey, you can be good at this." But note that those are multiple things, right? That's Mike saying, "Hey, you could be a good rower," which, yeah, I was a decent high school rower, but I was able to go to college because of it, right? But then him putting his hand on me and saying, "Hey, look, you can coach, right? This is something that you can do." So like for me, and for any young person coming into the program, those people have to be there, right? There have to be people saying, "Look, I know it's hard. I know you may be the only one at this moment, but like when I look at Patricia or I look at Daphne, if you don't go there, then the rest of us don't see a path, right?" And that's the important part. Arshay had a bunch of other guys around him who could forge a path for a whole group of people, right? And that's what it takes. It takes the invitation and it takes the welcome, but then it takes the support to go through the things that are going to be hard as we go through this. And that's true in college. That's true for the high schools. That's true for the community programs. And, we have to be intentional about that. That's not something where, that's just going to happen. It's not suddenly there are going to be all these kids knocking down the doors of the boathouses saying, "Hey, let me in." No, we have to, as Arshay said, we have to go out and meet people and say, "Hey, look, we have this opportunity. Can you help us help you?"
Yeah. And I think that coach reaching out to you is a wonderful example of, how valuable it can be to have someone believing in you as a young person before you even believe in yourself. And it sounds like that's what that coach was doing with you. And coming back to you as a coach, you also told a story, just to bring everyone back to the reality we are in. You told a story that was of being a young coach, younger, you're still young.
Not that young.
A young coach at a race and going to catch a boat, right? I think there were a lot of crews out and you needed to catch one of them. And you said that somebody had hollered to you, "What are you doing on the dock?" Or, "Hey, why are you there?" Somebody questioned that. And then you told me that parents came out and said, "Oh, no, that's our coach, and, stood up for you. And you said that you felt at the same time you were grateful, but it was also a little bit, I don't know if you used the word embarrassed. Yeah. What was the word that you used?
I don't remember exactly the word, but I mean, embarrassed was definitely the feeling because suddenly, and so the race was the Stotesbury Cup in Philadelphia. And, it was that very first year that I coached. So 1991, I believe it was. And I had raced that regatta as a student at TC Williams. I'd raced it 3 times and made the finals and done pretty well at TC Williams. And, then to be the assistant coach, and we had a junior women's 8 that won a medal. It wasn't really expected to win a medal, and so they did really well. Dee Campbell, our head coach, was elsewhere with the varsity, so I was at the finish line. I got to go down and be the person, the first time in my life I ever get to go down and congratulate these guys who I've gotten to work with. And by the way, Jaime Rubini's daughter was in that boat. If you remember, the jeweler who went on to be in the national team. And, it was surreal because I started walking down this dock and I hear from the finish line tower, the finish line referee saying, "What is your purpose here?" And it was gratifying to then hear the TC Williams parents yell almost in unison, "He's our coach." But at the same time, here I am in my very first year as a coach, and I'm enjoying this moment because everyone knows the Stotesbury Cup's a really tough regatta. It's one of the largest high school regattas in the world. And I can't enjoy that moment because this person is questioning whether this is my space on the dock, even though my athletes are there, the parents are there supporting me, all of these great things are happening. And that was really hard. And what was harder, and I think probably Arshay remembers this from when we formed the Black Coaches and Rowers Association, was then hearing from other young African-American coaches who have had that experience since, and not just 1 or 2, but 5 or 6 at that particular regatta. And that was really disheartening because I guess at some point I had this feeling like, okay, because I went through this won't happen again. But the truth is it's still there. It's still a part of our sport.
Yeah. So jumping off of that, sometimes people will say to me in my role as CEO, Amanda, this is not a large group, but the feedback will be, we don't need to do all of this work. Rowing is so inviting. Stop laughing,
Sorry.
Kevin. I haven't finished. We don't need to do all this work. Rowing is, side note, these are white people saying this to me. You don't need to do all this work. Rowing is so welcoming. Rowing is just about putting the work in. Rowing is about a community and a brotherhood, or it's not necessary. You don't need to make any statements. You don't need to create these councils or this space. And what do you, this is to all of you, what is your response to that? I know what mine is, but this isn't about what my response is to that.
My response to that is yes, those things are true if you have the opportunity and the access, right? If you've grown up with that opportunity and access and support, that's the other piece. Yeah, all of those things are true, right? No one ever asked me when I was on the ergometer what color I was, right? None of my friends cared. They just wanted to know that I could row. They just wanted to know that I was going to be there when, as Patricia was saying, in the last 500 meters when it hurts and your body is saying, what in the world are you doing here? All they wanted to know was that I was going to be there and pulling hard with them. But I had to have the opportunity to be in that space. And I had to feel safe in that space in order to gain those things that you're talking about, right? If you don't feel supported in that space, you're never going to feel the camaraderie. You're never going to feel like you can do your best work. Rowing is hard enough, just the sport. Forget about then questioning whether or not you actually belong there.
Yeah, it's the myth of meritocracy, which I feel like it's not just in rowing, but we have this idea that people just need to work hard enough that they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But how do you expect people to do that if, like Kevin said, there isn't the opportunity in the first place, if they don't have boots? So I think recognizing that access, visibility, these are things that are so important to providing people with the tools to discover rowing as that sport that is inviting, that is welcoming. But we need the opportunity to be able to discover that. And also our sport needs to take on that mission of really considering how can we make sure that for people who are underrepresented in the sport, that they see people who look like them, who've gone through that experience, who can have that common ground on which to fall back on each other, that sense of community. And it doesn't just have to be that we build that community on teams themselves. I think a lot of efforts that around what Arshay's doing, what Kevin's doing with the Black Rowers and Coaches Association, that's about building networks and bridges across the United States. And I think that those are so important.
Are there pieces of the sport that you think we need to collectively peel away, traditions that some might see as positive, or, sort of, is there anything attached to the brand of rowing in this country that needs to be, in your mind, peeled away to make the sport more inclusive and more inviting?
I absolutely believe so. And I think that the diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be beyond the rowing itself. It needs to be with your suppliers. It needs to be with just the business around the sport as well. How can we be inclusive? So it's necessary to have a concerted effort and a diversity initiative, just like Title IX was. What was the big outcome of Title IX? It shifted women in college. At that juncture, men were majority college co-eds. Now it's women. So, in addition to bringing the experience of rowing, the beauty of rowing, bringing the experience of business, bringing the experience of this type of professional networking, building up the coaching, huge. Kevin, so right on, so awesome that you are coaching. Great that there's an association. The professional development for any individual in any profession, business networking, professional development is germane to the whole development of the entire sport. And so what do I hope that translates into? To be honest, less foreign coaches as our national team coaches, more US coaches as our national team coaches, less foreign recruiting for college students, and more recruiting out of our local colleges and communities. This is absolutely required. Why? Because our at Cal, that's a public institution, right? So it's gaining tax dollars from public people who need to be able to access everything that these colleges and universities have to offer. It goes so deep. It's so structural.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Don't be sorry, but you need to answer one question before you jump off, Pat. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you in this hour together. Our question that we're going to be asking everyone who joins us for this podcast, don't worry, it is not difficult. What is your favorite meal for when you get off the water? Your favorite post-river, lake, reservoir meal? What is your go-to?
Okay, I'm going to say from when I was a poor college student. Kid you not, I ate beans for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, canned beans, and my dear rowing roommate said, wow, but nothing beats a good burrito.
Said like a true Californian. I love it. Well, thank you for joining us.
It's been such a pleasure to just meet and dialogue and commune with you all. Really appreciate it. And congrats for what everybody is doing around this space. Great to see everybody.
Thank you, Pat. To the rest of you on, I just want to know if there's anything else you want to make sure we touch on in terms of, the sort of the outstanding question for me remains, is there anything that stands out for you that you want to make sure that U.S. Rowing as a governing body is leading on or taking on in the coming months and years, and or anything else you want to make sure that we touch on in this hour together?
I think one thing that I would say is that just in general, in our sport, we're going to have a lot of difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And, the burden often falls on people of color to try and do the educating and to help people learn. And sometimes when we embark on that journey, we get defensive reactions from folks, trying to explain why, this issue that you've identified isn't really a problem, or, here's what we're doing about it. And so, this isn't necessarily to U.S. rowing specifically, but I think our sport in general is going to have to think about, when we have those difficult conversations, what are we doing in response to it? Are we putting up barriers, making excuses, explaining why it's too difficult? Or are we accepting that we are complicit and need to have a reckoning with what role we individually and collectively have played in failing to move our sport forward when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion at the speed at which it should be?
Yes, and I hope you and others will hold us accountable as we move forward, because I couldn't agree with you more on that. So thank you. Arshay?
Yeah, just to add what Daphne said, I think uncomfortable conversations. I mean, we all know as rowers, right, to get the results that we want, we have to be uncomfortable, right, the whole time, and we get to where we need to be. And I think that, you talk about peeling, back those layers of some of those traditions. I don't think is, I think that's something that has to be done by those of privilege in the sport, right? Those who are white. I don't think we as Black people can bear all that. And I think the last thing, I read a lot of books on leadership, right? And I think everything rise and falls on leadership. I'm just a firm believer that, U.S. rowing, that the board, all committees, staff, refs have to really work hard, not just with providing for young people that we're working so hard for and trying to reach, but really work hard in making sure that those groups really reflect the world we're trying to see in the sport, right? Like, it have to be an effort. It's something that shouldn't be hard, right? Like, honestly, like, I mean, years, I've been going to so many U.S. rowing conventions, and I would see Kevin, and I didn't speak to him the first couple. I didn't want to be like that. Hey, the other Black guy in the room, what's up, man? Like, I see him, I know everything about him, and I'm like, man, he like coach on this elite level. And then finally we spoke, but I've seen him talk about, okay, I want to be on this board. I want to make a difference. This is what I want to do. And I'm waiting to hear the news, and he's not there, right? Like, I felt like all the things that were faced, that U.S. rowing had to face when George Floyd was murdered, some of those problems would have been solved if he was there, knowing, and I heard of all the energy he brought to the diversity committee and the things that he was talking about. Yeah, Kevin, people was talking about you all the time, man. And I appreciate that. And I feel like we see more things, more problems ahead, but we can attack those issues now by bringing all those voices into leadership, those different perspectives, right? You heard, we all, me, Patricia, Daphne, Kevin, look the same, but still have the same goal and mission, but still have different perspective on things, still came from very different places, but same goal, same mission, right? And I think that it's not one Black person that's going to come and really solve problems in a board of 15 white folks, or on a committee or a staff of 15 white folks. But we need to make sure this thing is really equal across the board when it comes to leadership and those who make decisions. And I think for me, again, everything rises and falls on leadership. So let's really, I think we will get there with making sure the world, right, and the boathouses reflect the diversity in the city, but we have to make sure that governing body does as well.
Absolutely. It's critical. Thank you. Kevin, is there anything else from you? Otherwise, I'm gonna need to ask you all what your go-to meal is when you get off the water. I
can probably combine those two things. I mean, among other things, I was a history teacher before, I got into full-time coaching, and, I taught African-American history. And one thing that you learn, and by the way, I don't know that I was really qualified to teach African-American history. I don't think I knew my own history, even though I was a history major when I started teaching that course at Gonzaga College High School. But I learned a lot. And the one thing you learn very quickly when you take an uncritical look at America is that we are a democratic nation that's founded on the principles of white supremacy. And that is a fact. And I think one thing that I have been both heartened by and disheartened by has been the reaction to the reality of that in America. I think that a lot of people, it's a continuous education, and I do believe that the arc of history is generally positive. But, seeing the reaction of people to the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna, it's been so heartening to see my friends, my white friends, stand up and say, I didn't know this. This is my fault that I don't know this. And we need to do something about it. Not you, Kevin, not, you, Arshay, not you, Daphne. I need to do something about this. And there's a lot of truth to that. Like, we are here with the support of a lot of people, and we are going to be the people who hopefully help U.S. rowing move forward. But it has to be a concerted effort. It's going to be messy. It's going to be, there are going to be days where we'll screw it up. But I think on the whole, the direction is sound. And if we continue in this direction, this could be an organization, the sport is only going to get healthier and grow, which would be really exciting for all of us.
So well said. And I feel so lucky to have you in my corner. Or maybe I'm in your corner. I don't know who's in which. I don't know who's in which corner. I think we're doing this together.
Yeah, and my meal is waffles. I love waffles in the morning after practice. That's good stuff.
Oh, good choice. Good choice. Okay, Daphne?
I just want to say that, Kevin, you reminded me of something that I wanted to say, which is that I think there's a misperception that rowing is not political or apolitical. And, I've seen on the U.S. Rowing website or Facebook when U.S. Rowing makes a statement in support of, combating Asian American hate or Black Lives Matter, some of the comments that I see there are asking why is U.S. Rowing posting this? Rowing is it's not a place for politics.
You should see my inbox, Daphne. Yes.
I just want to say that rowing, like anything else, is a social institution. And if you think you are being apolitical, that in and of itself is a political statement. And then in terms of favorite post-race food, I went through a big phase in college where I could not get enough kale. So I would have anything plus kale. Yeah,
These
exactly.
California kids.
I had never seen kale until I came to California, and then kale and avocado became staples.
That is very healthy, Daphne. You are definitely winning in that category.
And that's why she was on the national team and I wasn't.
So I wasn't going to say it, but waffles, kale. Okay, Arshay?
I would have to say it was weird. It was like junk food, but everyone knew. For me, it was like Nutty Buddies. It was just something about the Nutty Buddies that I just had to have it after rowing, right? It wasn't too heavy, right? But it wasn't great, But that was my snack. That was, and plus it was cheap, and so that was my thing.
I love it. Thank you all, Daphne, Arshay, Kevin, for joining the first swing of things with U.S. Rowing. It's been such an enjoyable hour with all of you, and it won't be the last of many conversations.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Honored to be here.
And that's a wrap for our very first episode of The Swing of Things. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, and follow from wherever you get your podcasts. It will help others to find us. Next up, I'm super excited to chat with U.S. Rowing's elite athletes as they complete their final preparations ahead of the Tokyo Olympics. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch at theswingofthings@usrowing.org. Thanks for listening.